So, Tiffany, if you want to come up here. This is a special night for me. Who enjoys testimony night like I do?
Yes.
Me too, because I don't have to teach or lead. This is special to me because Tiffany is, I've described to her to my service team as kind of a homebody of this campus. She and I both grew up going to Stockdale Christian School here. She was young, one grade below me, and we knew of each other all through our student life, and then we all just kind of went our different ways as we became older. And Tiffany has a story, just like I do. So, welcome, Tiffany.
Oh,
Share with us.
And it's always kind of a trip when you knew each other as kids, and then you're like 50 years old and you see each other again. Like, is that you? I'm just kidding. But it's such a privilege to be here tonight. So let me get started. So my name is Tiffany, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who has gained victory over an addiction that stole my peace, damaged relationships, and brought chaos into my life. 5 years ago, I started a Celebrate Recovery step study for the only issue I suspected I had at the time, codependency. It became clear within the first few months of step study that codependency was just one of the many symptoms of a deeper issue. I discovered that I had an addiction society viewed as more of the norm than a problem. From the outside, I looked like a good Christian who just wanted to help others all the time. No one could see the internal struggle that my addiction was creating as it robbed me of rest, peace, and a sound mind. For years, it was close to impossible for me to slow down my busy schedule to rest when needed and to honestly be mentally present for my husband and 3 children. Unknowingly, I had created a crazy busy lifestyle with the hope that just doing one more thing would provide a feeling of self-worth and drown out the thoughts that shouted, "You're not good enough." The definition of addiction is habitual, psychological, or physiological dependence on a substance or practice beyond one's voluntary control. My addiction was the practice of busyness. I grew up in a Christian home with 2 younger sisters. I was very close with my grandparents who loved hosting large family gatherings that included cousins, aunts, and uncles, some of them that are here tonight. As the oldest of 17 grandchildren, stories about the day I was born were often told to make me feel special. Despite the love and acceptance I received from my large family, I often felt lonely. Loneliness and boredom became my enemy because in those moments I could hear the negative self-talk the loudest. Growing up in Bakersfield, I actually attended here Stockdale Christian School from kindergarten through 5th grade. In 6th grade, I moved to a public school where I knew no one. Shortly after starting the new school as a preteen, I entered a season of becoming extremely self-conscious of my looks. Insecure thoughts often hijacked my brain as I imagined that kids were making fun of me. Fear of rejection was also a constant internal struggle, which made it hard to make friends. In 7th grade, we started a new church where I finally made some new friends who I connected with, but then got the news that we were moving. The summer before 8th grade, my family moved from Bakersfield to Orange County. Talk about shock. I would start another school year filled with insecurities and fear of being the new girl again. Despite my insecurities and fears, I did manage to make a few good friends that year. I started high school with my new friends, who I thought I had a lot in common with, but it turned out I was wrong. By the end of my sophomore year of high school, my friends partied way too much, and 2 friends were pregnant by the end of the school year. I struggled junior year trying to find a new group of friends who didn't party, and I eventually gave in to peer pressure and joined my friends in the partying scene. I felt like I finally fit in and the inner critic quieted down, but my parents were really good at catching my rebellion, and I was on restriction more often than not. I finally gave up and begged them to send me to a Christian school where some of my church friends attended. I transferred to a new school in the middle of my junior year, and a few months later, a friendly Christian girl welcomed me into her group. I was hopeful that my senior year of high school would be better, and I would stay out of trouble. The summer before my senior year turned out to be the best summer of my life because that's when I met my husband, Mike. Shortly after meeting Mike, I felt such love and admiration from him that I finally felt secure in who I was, because Mike really, really liked me. He said I was rad. something. So 2 years after meeting, I was 19, Mike was 21. We married, and the negative self-talk quieted down for the next 5 years until I became a mom. And by the way, I just celebrated 30 years of marriage last month. And I always joke that, the large family gatherings, Mike was a part of that. And if I didn't marry him, I think my uncle would tell you they'd be mad. Everybody loved him. So a few years after we were married, I would catch myself daydreaming about what it would be like to have a child of my own who loved me unconditionally. I probably thought that motherhood would heal the lingering feelings of low self-worth, but in reality, the opposite happened. Shortly after giving birth to my son, the negative self-talk returned in a way that I did not expect. I started comparing the way I took care of my baby to how the other new moms at church were caring for their children. This new comparison game sent me traveling down the road of being overly involved in my children's lives as I tried desperately to be a perfect mom. Once I had become a mom of 3 children under the age of 5 years old, I realized that motherhood was a bit harder than I had dreamt about. In fact, trying to be perfect didn't work no matter how many books on parenting I read or how hard I tried. In my eyes, everywhere I looked, there was another mom doing motherhood better than me. The desire for perfection and control caused me to be unrealistic on what I could accomplish in a day. As I tried hard to be the perfect mom through the many activities and volunteering I was involved in, I had very little patience and would often lose my temper with the kids when they misbehaved. After throwing a fit, motherhood guilt would then consume my thoughts for days. Days turned into years as negative self-talk became a habit again, and this time it shouted, "You're a terrible mom." This was the beginning stage of me using busyness as a coping skill that quieted down the negative thoughts about myself. I was too tired to judge my motherhood performance. During my busiest season, I worked part-time from home for an attorney. I volunteered as president of the Placentia Moms Club. I led a Bible study for moms in my community. I sold a few houses as a realtor. I authored a book on outreach. I was outreach director at my church and started a PTA cooking co-op in the kids' school. And I have to tell you guys something funny. I wrote this book 12 years ago. And I'm so embarrassed to tell you that there's probably a million references to the word busy in the book, but it's even in the title. The title is Purposes of His Heart, God's Plan and Purposes for Today's Busy Woman. And this is a book about outreach, and I will not be selling these tonight until I reprint and take out some busy talk in there. But that's how busy I was. I wrote the book about and has the word busy in it. So it's a good book. I just got to revise it a little bit. So, anyways, it cracks me up. But the day that I realized that, you imagine? Like, oh no, proof back in the day. So I'll let you know when the second edition comes out, sometime in the next 10 years. So I love staying busy because it gave me a sense of self-worth, as everything I did became a performance as I looked for the approval of others. Each day started over with the insanity that completed tasks on my to-do list would improve my self-esteem. I also allowed external circumstances to control the level of peace in my life. I'd feel the most peaceful at the end of the day when the many items on my list were done. In hindsight, it was probably exhaustion I was experiencing and not peace. The problem wasn't necessarily what I was doing with my time, because many of the things I did were good. The problem was the motive behind it. I found myself looking for what's in it for me with each opportunity and not asking God if it was what He wanted me to do. If you asked me before I started step study if I struggled with anxiety, and I would have told you, of course not. The startling truth was that for almost 20 years, I was living life at an extremely high level of anxiety almost 24/7. I had no clue that the sped-up feeling that I had in my chest was anxiety. I thought the feeling I experienced was energy to do more. I think it was an addiction to adrenaline as well that I got from the anxiety and the busyness. Since my self-worth was directly tied to what I did, I got a lot done with this energy. As I was busy volunteering, I met many new people in the community, and as a new person I met shared something they were going through, I interpreted it as an open door to giving my opinion and advice. Any other codependents out there? I became really good at telling others how they could fix their lives with my unsolicited solutions. And the more people I helped, the more confident I became in my perceived ability to control others. As my confidence grew in my ability to fix people, it spilled over into my family in an unhealthy way. I started to believe that I could control my family's happiness by fixing all of their problems. I attempted to fix every negative emotion and problem I spotted in my children and husband. I'd occasionally ask God for help on some of the bigger issues that I couldn't handle, but when God took too long to answer, I'd answer my prayers myself. This is the time when God was no longer the Lord of my life. He was just a helper who I would consult with when I couldn't figure it out. In essence, I had pushed him off the throne and seated myself in his place. It was exhausting trying to be the Lord of not only my life, but my family's too. I thought I was doing a pretty good job at holding my family's future steady until my oldest son started down a path of rebellion that would challenge my role as the fixer. Austin's rebellion started as the typical behaviors you would expect from a teenager testing the boundaries. But I'll admit, it did catch me a bit off guard because I thought I was doing a good job raising him in a Christian home. By the end of his junior year of high school, we discovered that his rebellion now included smoking pot, and we were out of ideas for discipline that would persuade him to obey our strict but fair rules. His behavior had become unmanageable, and we were faced with the reality that despite our best efforts, we could not change our son. He was determined to do life his way on his terms, and it wasn't fair to his younger brother and sister to be subject to the stress and fighting that had gone on for too long. Austin would be turning 18 years old in just 3 months, so we tried one last-ditch effort to persuade him to change while we could still legally do something. After prayer and counsel, we made the painful decision to send our son to a Christian boarding school for troubled teens in the middle of his senior year of high school. The night that we hired a transport company to pick our son up in the middle of the night and safely deliver him to his new home 10 hours away was heartbreaking. It was also the first night I was forced to let go of control and trust that God would change my son's heart. 3 months later, our hopes were shattered when I received a call from the school that Austin had left. He left just 3 weeks after his 18th birthday. We knew this was a possibility when he turned 18, but we believed him when he said he would stay and finish the program a few months prior. At a family weekend visit, we told him that if he chose to leave before he finished the program, he would be on his own as an adult and responsible to take care of himself financially. The day that he changed his mind, no one could legally stop him as he walked off the property determined to get a ride home. In the midst of the painful news, God remembered me, a distraught mother, and I witnessed a miracle. On the same day that he left, Austin bought a bus ticket back to Orange County with money a truck driver gave him as he hitchhiked to the nearest town. That night, I went to sleep without worrying, knowing that God was protecting my son and he was safely on a bus. This was the beginning of a long and painful season for our family as we watched Austin take advantage of each family that tried to help. In fact, straight from the mountain, he moved in across the street with his best friend's house for 3 weeks, and it was so difficult to see him over there. But the families that took him in, their well-meaning intentions to help a kid whose parents wouldn't take him in only helped his drug addiction grow as he was accountable to no one. Almost daily, I was consumed with worry and fought the desire to help him. Every time I started making plans on how I could fix the situation, the Holy Spirit would gently whisper, "Let go." The lesson of learning to let go wasn't easy for me to understand as a firstborn, type A personality who liked to be in control. On many occasions, I'd argue with God with statements like, "But God, I have one more thing I can say that will make him feel guilty for what he's doing to his family, and maybe that will make him change." But God again would respond with a gentle "let go" that I really felt in my spirit. And this was so hard, especially when one day Austin showed up at our doorstep to tell me he was hungry and he had no money. I was the only one home that day, and as I quickly gave him a bag full of groceries from our pantry, I told him, "Don't ever do this to me again." I was torn on whether giving him food was enabling him or what I should do as his mother. Over the course of the next few years, he would ask to move home when it looked like his resources were about to run out, but then another friend would take him in. As weeks turned into months and months into years, one day at a time, I learned to let go and stay committed to praying for my son, trusting that God would protect him and change his heart sooner than later. On January 6, 2016, There were signs that my prodigal son's heart was beginning to soften. It became clear that this was the day I prayed for, and it was filled with so many miracles. Our family nicknamed that day in January Surrender Day. A week before Austin came home for a Christmas visit, we heard from the family who had given him a chance to a fresh start that he wasn't welcome to return. Austin was fairly confident that he had another place lined up the day he left our home on what would have been the day he flew back to Texas. 2 days after leaving our home, his plans for a place to stay fell through. He ran out of money, his cell phone was disconnected, and he was hungry. Another miracle was that the biggest rainstorm of 2016 hit on Surrender Day. My distraught son showed up at my office on a skateboard, wet from the rain, and with nowhere to go. I gave him a list of homeless shelters that he started to call on my office phone. He soon learned that many were full because of the rain. And as the day went on, I watched him slowly become undone. By late afternoon, he came to his senses and literally threw up his hands and cried, "This life leads to nowhere. I can't do this anymore. I need God and I need my family." And after many behind-the-scenes discussions that day, by evening his grandparents invited us all over and offered to take him in if he agreed to enter an outpatient addiction program for the next 30 days. And he agreed. He truly came to his senses that day and was ready to change. I'm happy to say that my son has never relapsed on weed and has celebrated 5.5 years of sobriety. Woo! That's a miracle. So God knew exactly what it would take to bring my son to his senses, and he didn't need my help. He just asked me to get out of the way and pray. So one day Austin came home from his addiction program with a codependency test and asked me to take it. Did you know there was a written codependency test? I didn't know. And of course I was having a great time answering it. Do you enjoy helping people? Oh yeah, totally. Like, do you know what people need to do with their life? Oh, totally. Like, let me tell you what to do, I'm not saying those are the questions, but they kind of implied that. So when I was done, Austin totaled my score and he said, "Mom, you've got the highest score I've ever heard of." That was the only score he ever heard of, probably. And so I immediately called Margie, our Celebrate Recovery ministry leader, to find out if she had ever heard of codependency, because I think I might have it. And of course she had heard of codependency and invited me to join a women's step study starting in a few weeks. I decided to go so I could learn more about what codependency was. Since she didn't tell me, I figured it must be really bad. So it's kind of bad, but kind of not. So she did say, as Austin goes through his program, it would be good for you to work on yourself to better your relationship. And I liked how that sounded and I signed up. Yes, best decision of my life. The first question we answered that night was, what areas of your life do you have power to control? Power or control over? My first response was everything, of course. But then I took a few minutes to really think about it, and I thought, okay, this is probably a trick question. And then I realized the only area I had control over was myself. I quickly remembered that I didn't have control over my son during his prodigal journey, but to be honest, I was still trying to control some other areas of my husband and 2 other children's lives. As I allowed God to shine a light on the hidden areas of my heart each week, he gently began to reveal the root of my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Insecurities from my teen years had manifested as bad habits that robbed me of both peace and joy for most of my life. God showed me how the negative self-talk patterns of my past had caused wounds that needed healing. These hurts had turned into hang-ups that now affected every area of my life. Codependency was just the tip of the iceberg. My relationship with my son was just one of the many relationships that had suffered over the years by my codependency habit. Until I started step study, I thought I got over things easily and I didn't have any resentments. Turns out I was a stuffer. God also revealed that I had a lot of resentment towards myself for mistakes of my past. And Satan would often bring up those mistakes at random times, and I would feel condemnation like it happened yesterday. It was now time to give God the opportunity to heal my hurts, habits, and hang-ups as I worked the 12 steps. No matter how hard it got, I endured the discomfort of letting go of control in every area of my life. And each week the healing process got a little easier and I saw progress. Another hang-up that needed healing was the belief that I earned God's love and approval by what I did for others. When I received attention from others by what I was doing, especially in the area of ministry, I felt I made God proud. When I learned that I wasn't responsible for fixing every person who shared the problem with me, it was unsettling. I felt uncomfortable with the thought of disappointing God by not helping people with my unsolicited advice when they shared their problems with me. This is when I started to learn how to let go of being the Lord of my life and that of my family. It was time to allow Jesus to not only be my Savior, but Lord of my life. The next area of my heart that needed healing was hard for me to understand. God wanted me to be still. Be still sounded similar to let go, so I didn't think it should be too hard to do. So I added be still today to my to-do list and decided to just sit in my backyard. I felt so uncomfortable sitting there doing nothing. I realized I had a fear of boredom because in the past when I was bored, negative self-talk would take over my thoughts. As I sat there, I struggled with feelings like I was wasting time. But as I set the timer and practiced being still each day, a calm feeling filled my soul like never before. I noticed a difference in the way I felt within days as I practiced being still. I felt much calmer and at peace, and the extreme fatigue I felt in the early evening was gone. While I didn't feel like myself, I liked this version of Tiffany much better. I began asking God for help with the little things in my day, and He showed me what was important and what could be done later. Being still also brought clarity to my mind as if I suddenly viewed life through HD and was more aware that God's presence is with me. When my mind was focused on His closeness, it reminded me to invite Him to help me manage my time and commitments. Including God in my day was one of the ways that I made Him Lord of my life again. I learned that most things on my to-do list were things added for the approval of others and to make myself feel important. Forcing myself to be still was a huge part of the process of breaking my addiction to busyness. God knew exactly what He was doing when He told me to be still. Isaiah 41:29 in the Message Bible says, He energizes those who get tired, but those who wait upon God get fresh strength. I am grateful for the healing process of completing 3 Celebrate Recovery Step studies. I continue to experience joy and peace despite any chaos Satan tries to bring into my life. As a mom of 3 young adults today, life is in no way perfect, but as I hand over each battle to the Lord to fight on our behalf, I found freedom from the chaos of control, and I'm reasonably happy. My life verse is Exodus 14:14. Be still, the Lord will fight for you. This verse is a promise, and it's been proven true as I have made Jesus both my Savior and Lord of my life. My life is still a performance, but for an audience of one. Jesus is the one I look to for applause. And I know as I place my tendency to control everything into His scarred hands, I've made Him proud. And then I remember Jesus took naps, and so will I. Thank you for letting me share.